Welcome to the Radiate Wellness Podcast. I'm your host, Christy Clemens Hoffman. Each week we will discuss tools, tips, and ways to radiate your best life ever, interviewing practitioners, authors, and luminaries to help you on your path. Wellness, joy, peace, abundance. What do you want to radiate? Hi, we are here to radiate the fine art of holding space today with Heather Plett, who is quite the expert on holding space. Heather is an international speaker, writer, coach, and facilitator who is also a wisdom seeker, edge walker, community gatherer, and story catcher. So that's quite a few different titles, Heather. Welcome.
Thank you.
So happy to have you here. I think we all hear about holding space, and we may not all know what that is, but we kind of know what the end product is. But before we even get into that, I'd kind of like to go a bit into your background. So you've been a writer, a coach, and facilitator. How long have you been kind of in this field of the helping, the serving? How long have you been doing that type of thing?
I started my own business about 7.5 years ago. So this is really focusing on this particular work has been about 7.5 years.
What did you do before that?
I worked in the field of communications. I worked first in the federal government for a number of years in director positions in communications and public relations. And then I worked for a nonprofit organization doing similar work as the national director of communications and fundraising for a international development nonprofit.
Yeah. And so no wonder that the writing on your website is so compelling and so gentle and so heartfelt. So I'm not surprised that you have an extensive background in communications. When did you decide that it was time to break away from that mold and go out on your own?
Well, when I started that position in a nonprofit, I kind of told myself that it would be a 5-year path that I would be there, because even when I started that job, I had a sense that I was going to be doing my own thing at some point. Whatever reason, I had this kind of calling or longing to be out on my own. So I set myself a goal that in 5 years I would do that. It ended up being about 6.5 for various reasons, but that's that. So it's been about 13 years that I've been on this intentional path towards this kind of work.
Yeah, and what started you on this path toward this type of work?
Mm-hmm.
Was there
Yeah, I think if I try to find a historic point in time that kind of launched everything I do now, I would say that it was first emerging for me when I had a stillborn son. About 18.5 years ago, I ended up in the hospital in the middle of my third pregnancy and was suddenly on bed rest in the hospital it ended up being about 3 weeks, and ended up with a stillborn son. But those 3 weeks were with the intent of trying to save the pregnancy. And that kind of put my whole life on hold and put me into this other kind of space. And I had this really quite remarkable experience in the hospital where it almost became a bit of a spiritual quest for me in those 3 weeks. And I went into a fairly deep kind of personal it's hard to describe. It was a little bit of a pilgrimage and a little bit of a breaking open of my kind of old way of being in the world, and this quest for something new. And so I came out of that really knowing that there was some kind of longing that I had for a different way of living and being, and different way of working. And so that was so it's been probably 18.5 years now that I've been finding my way toward this work. And really what happened in the hospital were some really unique things. And one, I say that I started my work as a coach in the hospital, because here I was for 3 weeks sitting in a hospital bed without much to do. And all of a sudden people seemed to be kind of attracted to my room, and they would sit and talk and share their stories with me. And I was becoming a coach without knowing that language then. I was becoming this sort of support person. I was holding space for people in my hospital room, and I didn't have the language for it yet, but that was where it kind of started.
So, and you were the patient in that situation, the one who was, you would think that people are coming by to look in on you, to take care of you, and to hold space for you. And here you were serving others, coaching others, holding space for them. Did you find yourself kind of naturally drifting toward that type of role?
Yeah, it was kind of puzzling at first, because I would end up in these deep conversations with the nurses, and then even some doctors would come and talk to me. Like it was like they felt this somehow compelled to end up sitting in my room, and we'd have these long chats. And one of the nurses said, as she was leaving my room, she says, "I don't understand what it is about this space, but I walk into your room and I just feel calm, and I feel, like it just feels really lovely, and I walk out feeling refreshed." And she was somebody who was having some parenting struggles, and she would come and talk to me about her kids and stuff. And she said, I feel like I walk out of here with a fresh perspective, and I don't even know for sure what happened, but it just sort of showed up. And it wasn't like I given her specific advice or anything, but it was just in that kind of container of my room that things sort of shifted. And so I really started to kind of tune into that, as what is going on here, and why, I had to be receptive to it, that the whatever that was, and then offer it up to people, and that kind of became my calling, really, in a sense.
Oh, I can imagine. That had to be very life altering. I mean, not only did you lose a child, but
Mm-hmm.
found that there was profound healing and profound transformation in just providing that space.
Yeah.
So I imagine it was extremely transformative. And so now you've
Yeah.
turned holding space into, I don't know, I hate to say product, because that just makes it sound like something else, but you've transformed it into something that you can help people replicate and duplicate. And so
Mm-hmm.
what is this fine art of holding space? Like I said before, we kind of know what the end result is. We know that when someone is holding space, then that we're allowed to vent, to grieve, to feel our feelings, to do all of these things. But how would you define what holding space is?
Mm-hmm. It's really about the intentional act of creating a container where a person is safe to have the complexity of their life experience, where they're not feeling judged, where they're not, being given directions, or being, given advice that they didn't ask for. They're allowed to go into the complexity of their emotional experience, their confusion, their grief, etc., and know that they are being held in a respectful and contained way that gives them both the safety to not feel that they might potentially be wounded by the experience, but also it gives them I've been using a fair bit of attachment theory in my work, and attachment theory talks about there being a safe haven and a secure base. So the safe haven is a safe place to run to if you need to hide, and have that safety. And then the secure base is like a launching pad, like it's a place to launch from, that they allow you to then have courage and grow from there. So that's really what I see holding space is about offering that safety for complexity and for mixed emotions and stuff, but then also encouraging that freedom and autonomy and growth out of that place.
Oh, I love that. I love that, because when we do hold space for someone, it does feel very safe. Feels like we're being judged. And I know as humans, sometimes we seem hardwired to judge and hardwired to want to help solve problems. How do we shut that off? How do we get out of that? And
Well, this is why one of the things that I teach again and again is that you can't hold space for other people unless you do it for yourself. And so what I tell people, first of all, spend time with yourself. Like if you can become comfortable with your own complex emotions, if you can become uncomfortable with your pain, with your fear, with holding that and not judging it in yourself, then you can become comfortable in holding it for other people. So first really is, wrestling with, why am I judging myself? Why am I shutting this down? Why don't I, why do I feel like I have to run when things become uncomfortable, or I have to numb them out? Once you can start to hold that and practice that, active, support of yourself, then you can offer it in other people as well.
mm-hmm. Good. So when we are holding that space for others, is there something that we should say, things we should say and things we should not say? When do we know how to, when is the time to speak and when is the time to just shut up?
Yeah. You know what? I'm really hesitant to bring any shoulds into this work because shoulds become rule-based, and this isn't rule-based work. It's intuitive based work. And so the first thing I say is start practicing good discernment based on your intuition of what's needed in that moment. And good discernment is usually checking in with the other person what they need, asking like, I have an idea for you, but I don't want to offer it to you unless you are receptive to it, or or really want it. So I being willing to withhold the advice that you might have, because they may want some ideas or advice, but each situation is different. Each person is different. If a person's really raw at that moment, they're not going to be too receptive to receiving advice. On the other hand, they might be really hungry for it and they want you to offer them something. So it's really paying attention to what's in the moment and what's in that person, and how am I responding to what they need for this time.
And so it's okay to ask.
Mm-hmm, absolutely. Yeah.
Okay. Oh, that's wonderful. That's wonderful. Yeah. I think I remember John Gray's book, Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus, and how there seem to be sort of delineated patterns of response according to gender. I don't know about that, but the offering and fixing rather than the listening and supporting. I know that when someone is hurting, you want to go in and fix it. You want to go in and help them and take care of it, but not necessarily, right?
No, it's very rarely is it the right thing to do to fix something for another person. Like even with your children, like I'd say that raising children is like a PhD in holding space, because you gradually, you have to change how you do it throughout their lifetime. Like sure, at the beginning they need lots of guidance and lots of, close holding, and gradually you're learning to let them go. Yeah, I've got 3 daughters from age 17 to 23, and I'm not telling them what to do much at all anymore. I let them wrestle with what they need to do, and I'll support them in figuring it out. But to give too much direction or try to fix things, what I talk about is I try to talk about the opposite of holding space too, to help people understand it. And I talk about, I've used different terms, but one of the terms I talk about is hijacking space. Like once we're trying to fix things for somebody else, then we're trying to control the space and hijack it. And usually that's about our own needs, our own, what we need out of the situation or what we want as the outcome. It's not really putting their desired outcome at the center of our purpose.
Right. So like what might that look like if someone was hijacking space?
Well, we've all done it. I mean, when we show up and we're feeling insecure and we're feeling like we need to give good advice, or we're feeling like uncomfortable with the situation, there's lots of different terms people use. One of them is tone policing is a term that I sometimes use. It's not my original term, but when we need to control the environment because we're uncomfortable with their anger, for example, somebody has to release a lot of anger about a situation, and we tell them, "Oh, you need to calm down." Well, that's hijacking the space because we have discomfort with their anger. Well, maybe they need to express their anger. Maybe we need to support them in releasing it rather than in trying to calm it down because it makes us feel uncomfortable. So when we're inclined to enforce something or like control the situation, it's almost invariably about our own stuff showing up.
Right. I can totally see that. I saw on your website that you had kind of a leap of understanding with the holding space surrounding your mother being ill.
Mm-hmm.
There was a blog post that you wrote that many years ago that I'm almost positive I shared because I thought it was so transformative and so wonderful. Can you share just a bit about that experience?
Sure, that's really when this this work took off. I've been thinking about it for a number of years before that, and I worked as a facilitator, and that's where the language first came to me. I didn't invent the concept of holding space. The first place I started to hear it was in the facilitation or group hosting work that I did in some of the learning there, and but the concept really became solidified for me when I was with my siblings at my mom's bedside as she was dying. And it took me actually another 2 years to write the blog post, so I didn't write it right away. But there was we cared for mom in her home, and she died in her home. And while we were caring for her, there was this palliative care nurse that was showing up in support of us and in support of mom. And she was doing things like teaching us how to inject mom with morphine, and she was giving mom sponge baths in bed and things like that. And so, but she had this just really gracious, beautiful way of showing up and not not telling us what to do too much, but still supporting what we needed to do and giving us enough guidance to be able to support mom, but not, she didn't dump a big textbook full of, what to do when someone's dying kind of instructions on us. She just gave us enough, and she did what we needed in order to be present with mom. And so I reflected on that and ended up writing a blog post about the 8 ways that I saw holding space demonstrated in that moment with mom. And you're right, it went kind of crazy viral. I've lost track, but it's been over 5 million people that have seen it, and it continues to float around the world on a regular basis. It pops up all the time.
I think I've posted it a few different times. That's just really good advice, because sometimes we just don't know what to do when someone is grieving, mourning, when someone's angry, et cetera, et cetera.
Hi, this is Christy. I just want to say that we here at Radiate Wellness hope you are enjoying this podcast. It's free to you, and we hope that you find it informative and inspirational, heck, even fun. We have just 3 small asks of you to help us radiate growth. First, please hit the subscribe button on whatever platform you're listening on. That way, you'll receive a notification every time that we have a new podcast episode out. Next, please give us a thumbs up, a like, or a 5-star review. If you're feeling inspired, a positive review wouldn't hurt. These 2 small things will help others find us when they're searching for great podcasts. Finally, please tell your friends about the Radiate Wellness podcast. Better yet, show them how to find us and how to subscribe. If everyone did that, we would double our audience. Thanks a lot. We really appreciate it.
So, like, in what type of situations is it best to hold space?
Oh, that's a good question. I think holding space can show up in very many different ways, and I sometimes say that there's shallow versions of holding space, and then there's deeper and deeper versions. And you might hold space for somebody who maybe they had a fight with their husband and they need to vent about it, and they're going to phone you up, a friend or something, and so you're just going to hold space for 10 minutes while they vent about their husband, and then you'll move on to something else. And there wasn't a lot of complexity necessarily. You just supported them, maybe asked a few good questions to help them work through it, and that was it. On the other hand, you might hold space for somebody who's going through a major life transition or a depression, or there's really complex and sometimes really drawn out situations where you're holding space for a lot of complexity showing up. And this has been some of my work, is holding space for really complex conversations around things like race relations or gender issues around, these are systemic issues that run really deeply in our culture. And so we need to hold space for how do we speak to each other across difference, and how do we show up for each other in respectful but truthful ways where people can be heard. So it's holding space is something we do every day, and it's something, it shows up everywhere we go in some way or another.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And even what you're talking about in terms of racial and gender issues, so yeah, it shows up systemically in groups, and it shows up, collectively in a way, but it's also intensely personal sometimes too.
Mm-hmm.
So this healing work needs to be done on such a large scale in this country, especially. And so do you work with groups to learn this? Do you work with groups to understand this concept?
Yeah. I'm not very often brought in like as a consultant where I actually facilitate. I don't do that much as much anymore. I tend to be more training other people to hold space now. That tends to be my primary work. I run a 6-month holding space practitioner program, and then I do workshops all over the world. I just got back from Australia and New Zealand, where I did a variety of workshops. So I tend to be either brought in by an organization that wants to teach their people how to hold space, or I create my own learning opportunities, and either online or do retreats in different places.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, a 6-month training program. That sounds pretty intense. So what happens?
It is quite.
Yeah. What happens during the 6 weeks? That's quite a long time.
Yeah, 6 months actually. You'd be surprised how much material. There's actually quite a lot of content in there about the complexity. We go just for 2 months just on the basic concepts of holding space, really unpacking it and talking about what it is and how we need to show up for it. And then we spend a month. Actually, it's changing. I'm changing the program a bit, but a month and a half on holding space for ourselves, which is one of the most critical modules. Is how do we hold space for ourselves? How do we show up for our own stuff so that we're not projecting our baggage onto other people? And then we go into holding space in groups. Like if you want to do, I use the Circle Way as a process primarily for holding space in a group, and then we do holding space one-on-one, which is more of a coaching kind of module. Mm-hmm. And then holding space in complexity, and that one's like on how to hold space when there's conflict, how to hold space when race or gender issues show up. So yeah, there's a surprising amount of things to learn. And even in the 6 months, people say that there's too much, that there's so much they need to. Some people go through it a second time after the 6 months because they say there's so much learning there.
Yeah, 6 months, that's got to be very intensive, but also very transformative as well. Okay. And so I see that you also do Art of Hosting and Circle Way. You kind of mentioned the Circle Way. Can you What's the difference between those
Mhm.
programs and just holding space?
The Art of Hosting and Circle Way are closely connected, and but they offer different things. The Circle Way is really about it's a practice. It's being in circle with other people, and so it really gives us the framework for how to be in circle with other people. Art of Hosting takes that to a bigger scale, or to a different or into different contexts, and you learn different models of how to really, you're learning how to hold space in group process. And so it's, you know, if you want to be a facilitator slash host and you want to host conversations, Art of Hosting has a lot of valuable tools, and much of what I learned in those two practices, the Art of Hosting and Circle Way. What holding space brings to the conversation is it's not so much about a specific practice or a specific you know, how to do it. It's more about what am I doing when I'm doing it? What's the stuff that I'm, you know, what's showing up in me? How am I, what are some of the qualities I need to bring to this work, etc. So it's just adding another layer of nuance onto the other conversations.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, I can totally see that. And then what type of people take your programs? I can think of a few types of people I think should take your program, but what types of people do take your program?
It's a fairly vast range of people. Some of them want to do coaching, facilitation work, you know, in its purest form. Other people are. I have several people who are veterinarians who come to the program because they hold space for either both for the animals and for the families of animals, if the animals are under stress, or especially if animals are at the end of life, etc. So people that are working in that field. I've got people who work in hospice care. I've got pastoral people. I've got healthcare people. I've got, you know, people that just want to learn to hold space in their family better. It seems like it's quite a broad range of people that are, you know, a lot of them are in a helping profession of some kind. But others just want to bring it into their leadership. Like some are just are leaders. I've had some professors or some university administration kinds of people who want to do better in terms of leading and supporting their teams and students, etc. So it's pretty broad.
That's really interesting. So what I was really primarily thinking of was the healthcare field, for how to, you know, how doctors and healthcare providers can hold space for their patients, their clients, because, you know, bedside manner is very, very important. And, you know, having a rapport with a healthcare provider and between healthcare and the client and the consumer. So that's very important. What I have to say, I was a little taken aback by holding space for animals. I thought that was, wow. Tell me more about that.
Well, you know, I don't know that I'm qualified to teach that. I have people asking that question, and they'd probably be more qualified to teach it because I don't even have any pets, and so I don't have, you know, a lot of practice in holding space for it. But I think that a lot of the concepts can be transferred into how you hold space for animals as well, like how we treat people and give them safe containers is probably similar to how we would offer it to animals in our care as well, or, you know, that are parts of our members of our family.
Right. Yeah. You talked about with working with veterinarians in order to be able to hold space for a family member who may be grieving over the transition or
Yeah.
illness of a beloved pet. But even, you know, with animals, and I don't want to linger too long on this, but I'm always fascinated by the people who have a presence with animals that calms them, and a presence that does hold space for an animal who might be agitated or fearful. Right. So I thought that was very interesting and just kind of made my ears stand up a little bit. And so you're also you train this way of holding space, you train this manner of facilitation. I can imagine that all kinds of groups would love that. I love that you're also speaking with professors, college administrators. I think that's an awesome thing to do, and with organizations. You know, I would love to maybe have you speak with Darcy Graves, who was on our program to radiate solidarity, because she does very similar things, but in a slightly different capacity. And I'm reminded of John Knabb, who's also been on our program to radiate leadership, who also talks about many of these things. I love that there's so much overlap here. And
Mm-hmm.
but you also write. And so, do you have any books that you've written, or is it mostly blogs?
Yeah, I have two books that I've written, and neither of them have been published yet. So that's my, yeah. I have written. I've just finished writing one on holding space that I'm in the process of getting published. So I'm hoping within the next 6 months or so there will be a book on holding space that I've written and out in the world.
Oh, that'd be awesome. That'd be really wonderful, because I think this can, you know, be something that more and more people learn to do, because it's definitely a skill set, and you know, it can benefit in so many ways. You were talking about families too. I see so many families in my practice that people don't speak to each other. They can't speak to each other, and I just find that heartbreaking, that family
Yeah.
members have that just breakdown in communication. I just don't understand how we can allow that to get to that place, but I know it happens a lot. And it's wonderful to be able to do that. And you know, for ministers, for coaches, for anybody who's working with people. And so so when we are holding space, like in um, like what kind of things do we hold space for? I know that we talked about you know, holding space for people who going through grief, but like what else do you work with people on? You talked about, you know, maybe some group issues, gender, race, that type of thing. Yeah, what other things might be common that we would hold space for?
Well, a lot of at the end of the day, a lot of the work that I do is about holding space for people's self awareness and personal growth. So that shows up everywhere. Like if you're holding space for other people, it's a lot of it is going to end up being holding space for their own transformation at the end of the day. So one of the things I talk about is that we hold a liminal space, and liminal space is really about the space in between what was, you know, what once was and what hasn't yet emerged. And so one of the ways I talk about liminal space is it's the cocoon in between the caterpillar and the butterfly. There's this empty space. And so a lot of what I see holding space is about is how do we create a container that supports that kind of transformation, that, you know, allows people to let go of their old expectations, their old identity, their old, you know, way of showing up in the world, and, you know, wrestle with how am I being transformed into something new. And that's in almost everything, you know, whether it's group process where a group has hit a conflict and they need to reimagine how to show up together, or whether it's, you know, family grieving around their mother's death or something. They're changing their identity. They're no longer, you know, they no longer have a mother figure in that family unit, so they have to undergo this transformation. So that's, I would say that's kind of tends to be the common thread in much of my work.
Right. And I like on your website the liminal aspect of it. You talk about liminal being a line, maybe just a boundary almost, and then you also talk about circles and spirals. So how do these geometric concepts play into this work that you do? So how do the concepts of lines and spirals and circles, how does that translate to what you do?
Well, that's a big question. I don't know if there's one answer for all of that, because they all show up differently. I tend to be a visual thinker, and so I will very often develop a visual metaphor for almost all of my work. So we talk about, for example, the circle shows up in how we create containment, because I talk about it as being a bowl for each other. We create a container where, if you need to fall apart, if you need to be that, kind of broken, messy place, you need a container to hold that. So that's a shape, that's a bowl. Another thing that I talk about is the spiral is really this process of going deeper and deeper inwards. If we're getting closer to our own truth, if we're getting closer to collective truth or purpose of a group. And another thing I often use is a labyrinth. I love the labyrinth. It's one of my own personal practices, and I also incorporate it into my work. And it's really indicative of how we are journeying in our lives in general. There's this process of, moving towards the center, whatever the center is, the purpose, or that's a bit of the liminal space too. At the center is there's three steps in a labyrinth journey: the release, the receive, and the return. So release is going inward, letting go of our old baggage or old expectation, and then we're ready to receive whatever is new at the center. And then the return is coming back, the hero's journey, coming back into our lives. So every shape has a different meaning for me, and they show up differently, but I do tend to bring them in to help me explain this work and guide us in understanding it more deeply.
Oh, I love that. I love that. I'm a visual person too, and so that makes a lot of sense. The labyrinth, especially because we always think of a labyrinth as having, on one end there's the interest, and the other end. But no, a true labyrinth, you're supposed to find your way to the middle, find your way to the center, right? So that's beautiful. Now, is there anything that we haven't brought up or discussed that you think would be important to know?
No, I think we've covered most everything. There is one concept that I draw on quite a lot, and it's not original to me, but it's there's a book called The Anatomy of Peace, and it talks about whether your heart is at war or your heart is at peace. And he talks about, what he says is that, or they say, it's a multiple writers, but they say that when your heart is at war, when you show up in an interaction with another person, that's when you see the other person as an object to either be fixed or changed or conquered. And when your heart is at peace, then you see that other person as human and flawed and lovable, and so you have can show up with compassion with that other person. So really, I think when it comes to holding space, we can't hold space from a heart at war. So we have to really examine, why is my heart at war right now? Why am I feeling this need to conquer, to fix, to change, to, etc., to control? And I think the goal is always to seek a heart at peace, so that I can enter. And a heart at peace is not a pushover. It's not like it means you have to be just always, easily manipulated. It's still a very strong and sturdy heart, and has, a warrior heart, but it's at peace. It doesn't feel the need to be in a controlling situation.
Right. I would imagine that the heart at peace is equally as strong, if not stronger, than a heart at war. Because the heart at peace
Absolutely.
is stable, right? A heart at war is mutable and is always trying to seek its balance. But I think I love that. I might want to check out that book sometime. And so your website is heatherplett.com. That's Heather, Plett.com. And what is the program called? The 6-month program?
I've just changed the name. It used to be the Holding Space Coach Facilitator Program, and it's now, I'm just shortening it a bit to the Holding Space Practitioner Program. So the next registration opens, it'll be opening in July, but we start again in October. I'm taking a bit of a break. I used to run it twice a year, but I'm starting it up in October. But the registration will open in a couple of months for that.
Oh, wonderful, wonderful. Because I think this episode will be airing are being published sometime in early June. So that's good timing. So they can just sign up at heatherplett.com.
Yes, that's right.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Heather, for being on the program and for sharing your wisdom and expertise. I think this is going to be a very important topic for a lot of people, that we talk about holding space, but may not know exactly what that is or what that entails. And so I truly appreciate your time.
Thank you. I appreciate the invitation as well.
Radiate Wellness is a community of holistic and alternative healers and consultants based in the Kansas City area, dedicated to helping you create spiritual, energetic, and physical well-being. To learn more about our practitioners, services, classes, and events, or to schedule an appointment, visit us at radiatewellnesscommunity.com.